Welcome to Section 3, Radical Days of the Revolution. We're in Section 3 of Chapter 18, still talking about the French Revolution, and we are moving into the next phase of it here. In 1793, the Revolution entered what it calls the Radical phase. Now, we discussed at the end of the last video how radical groups like the Jacobins had taken control, mostly due to anger at the upper classes and fear that France would be attacked by other countries. Now we're going to discuss the drastic changes these radicals brought about. This led to a new government body that ruled France called the National Convention. Now, by 1792, fear was leading France into further violence. France was losing its wars. Remember, it was involved with wars against Austria and Britain and Prussia and places like that. And many people in France believed that King Louis was working with these foreign monarchs. I mean, he was related through marriage to the monarchs of Austria, so it kind of made sense. And this led angry mobs to attack nobles. They called for the king's head. They were calling for all sorts of drastic, violent measures. And radicals called for a new legislative body, and the National Convention was created. All right, so this replaced the old National Assembly. And it was way more radical than the old National Assembly. Remember, the National Assembly was created by the Third Estate during the opening stages of the French Revolution. Well, now people aren't happy and they want more extreme measures taken. So that's why we have the National Convention. And it immediately set about making some drastic changes. Most notably, it abolished the monarchy. Remember, abolish means got rid of. So they got rid of the whole institution of a monarchy, and they officially made France a republic. Now, like we said in the last period, you can't have a republic with a king, right? If you abolish the monarchy, what do you do with the guy who used to be king? Well, he was put on trial. They put King Louis on trial, and in 1793, he was executed. Here you have the famous depiction of him, and he stood, pretty proudly before the crowd. He tried to give one last speech to the crowd, but, very fittingly, it kind of sums up his rule. His voice was drowned out by the crowd and the drums, so he was kind of ineffective even in his last moments. And he was eventually beheaded, right? And here you see the famous picture of the executioner waving the decapitated head of Louis with the blood dripping down and so forth to the cheering crowd. And a few months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, was also executed. Now, the king's death ignited a period known as the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror lasted about 9 months, from September 1793 to July 1794. So not that long, but a lot happened during that short period of time. France was still at war with other nations, and it was also dealing with rebellions against the new government in the countryside. So to deal with these external and internal threats, the Committee of Public Safety was formed. This was a 12-man committee that was dominated by the Jacobins. You can see the hats that they're wearing. These were revolutionary caps. They were signs of loyalty to the revolutionary cause. Excuse me. And these guys had total control in France. Technically they were the legislative branch, but they made all the decisions. They were in charge of preparing France for war with other countries, and they were in charge of trials and executions for anyone they thought was against the revolution. It was led by this guy, Maximilien Robespierre. He was a middle-class lawyer, leader of the Jacobins. That's him back there in this picture. And he was known as the Incorruptible, meaning he could not be corrupted. He couldn't be bought off. And he was a zealot, meaning that he was super, super intense about his cause. He believed that the only way to achieve a good republic was through terror. He said liberty cannot be secured unless criminals lose their heads. So he was an extremist. And the way they lost their heads was with the guillotine. The guillotine became the real kind of iconic symbol of not only the Reign of Terror, but also the enduring image of the French Revolution. It got its name from the guy who invented it. The guy's name was Guillotine. That's why it sounds so French. And it was a very efficient way of killing compared to the old school chopping off of the head with the executioner. You'd put them in here, you'd lock their head into this right here, and then gravity would take care of the rest with this big heavy blade. And then off with their head, you get them out, and a new one comes in. Robespierre and the committee, what they would do is they would hold these revolutionary trials, which were, basically phony trials. Most of them were rigged, and they were meant to weed out traitors. This led to mass imprisonments and execution. About 300,000 people were arrested during the Reign of Terror. That's crazy when you think about it. And 17,000 were executed. That's the seating capacity for the Barclays Center in Brooklyn when the Nets play. So an entire NBA stadium was executed. Here you see some of the images from it, and just how crazy the bloodlust got, right? You got one after the other. See, they're lowering the dead bodies over here. They're getting another guy ready to be lowered in, raising up the guillotine. You see the parading of heads, very morbid and so forth, firing up the crowd. See someone kind of getting, looks like maybe getting kissed goodbye by their loved ones. So people were getting executed left and right. And eventually the killing got too much for the people, and they eventually turned on the Jacobins, and Robespierre in particular. And in 1794, Robespierre himself was arrested. And here you have him being put into the guillotine, and he was executed. So kind of an ironic twist that the guy who sent so many thousands of people to the guillotine, he met the same end. So after his death, the reign of terror really dies down. But in reaction to the craziness of the terror, the revolution entered its third stage called the Directory. Now this was a return back to moderate rule. Remember, moderate means a bit more middle of the road, okay? So the craziness of the reign of terror kind of scared people. They said, way too much blood has been spilled. Let's calm down a little bit. And the moderates in charge drafted a new constitution in 1795, and it created a 5-man directory to rule France. Right? So similar to the Committee of Public Safety, but in this case, not giving them such absolute control over everything. So the problem with the Directory, though, was that it was viewed as being both weak and corrupt, which is a bad combination for a government. France ended up becoming even more chaotic in the absence of strong leadership. This set the stage for the rise of a strong ruler that could bring order and glory to France, right? That's what the people wanted. They wanted somebody to take control. This leader, who we're going to talk about in the next video, would be Napoleon Bonaparte. But before that, it's also important to look at the changes from the revolution. Even though it was chaotic and bloody, the French Revolution still brought significant changes. For one, the old order was gone, right? The ancien regime of the 3 estates was done. The monarchy was abolished. It'll come back, as we'll learn about in future chapters, but for now, the king has got his head chopped off, and no one was taking the throne. The church was under government control still, with the civil constitution of the clergy, and society itself had changed, right? Fashion had changed. You look down here. Let me move me out of the way. Here you've got the caps, right? The red caps that we saw in the depiction of the Jacobins before. You see the long breeches of the sans-culottes. Okay, these guys are wearing the caps also. And the tricolors, right? The 3 colors, they signified the 3 mottos of the revolution: liberté, egalite, equality, and fraternity, right? So that's what the red, white, and blue signifies. They copied it off the United States, sure, but these are still the colors of the French flag to this day. Now, the revolution also spread nationalism. Now, nationalism, hopefully we know by this point, is a strong sense of pride in your country. This came both from revolution and war. Revolution brought national pride to the lower classes, fighting for higher status. And the wars with other European nations created a common unity throughout France. So violence can have that effect of unifying people. All right, so that finishes up the radical phase of the revolution, and also some of the big impacts it had. And then in the next and final video for chapter 18, we will talk about the Age of Napoleon.